This place is a junkyard. The words echoed through the small two-bay garage in Little Havana, Miami. A modest shop wedged between a Cuban bakery and a family-owned laundromat, where the smell of Café Cubano mixed with motor oil and the sounds of Spanish conversations drifted through open windows. The declaration came from a man named Preston Whitmore III, 42 years old, wearing a custom-tailored suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, Rolex Submariner on his wrist, designer, sunglasses perched on his head, even though it was 8 p.m. and the sun had set an hour ago. He was filming everything on his iPhone, the cracked concrete floor, the mismatched toolboxes, the fluorescent lights that flickered occasionally, the oil stains that decades of cleaning couldn't fully remove. He panned his camera across the shop with exaggerated disgust, narrating to his three friends who stood behind him, laughing. "Look at this dump. This is where Miami's best mechanic works. This looks like a junkyard that gave up pretending to be a business. I can't believe someone recommended I bring my car here." His friends, all Miami real estate developers, tech entrepreneurs, or trust fund beneficiaries, laughed on cue, their voices carrying that particular brand of cruelty that comes from people who've never had to work with their hands and look down on those who do. The target of Preston's mockery stood calmly near the far bay, wiping her hands on a shop rag, her coveralls stained with grease, oil under her fingernails, face showing no reaction to the commentary. Her name was Elena Rodriguez, 34 years old, born and raised in Little Havana to Cuban immigrant parents who'd arrived in Miami with nothing in 1991 and built a life through relentless work. Elena had grown up in this shop. Her father Miguel had opened Rodriguez Auto Repair in 1995, teaching Elena everything he knew about engines, transmissions, diagnostics, and the most important lesson: respect every customer, but never beg for respect in return. Miguel had passed away 3 years ago from cancer, leaving the shop to Elena. She'd kept it running, kept the name, kept the philosophy. She didn't advertise, didn't have a fancy website, didn't chase social media fame. She fixed cars, really fixed them, not just replaced parts until symptoms disappeared, and word spread through Miami's car community the way it always does when someone's genuinely excellent at their craft. Exotic car owners, classic. Car collectors, people with complicated problems that dealerships couldn't solve, they all eventually found their way to Elena's modest shop in Little Havana, including Preston Whitmore III, who'd been referred by another Porsche owner after his 2022 Porsche 911 GT3 developed an intermittent misfire that Miami's Porsche dealership had failed to diagnose after 4 visits and $8,000 in diagnostic fees. Preston had arrived 30 minutes ago, driving his GT3, guards, red paint, carbon fiber aero, package, ceramic brakes, $220,000 as equipped, into Elena's shop like he was doing her a favor by allowing his car to occupy her space. He'd immediately started complaining. The shop wasn't clean enough. The equipment looked outdated. There was no espresso machine in the waiting area. He'd demanded really, to see Elena's ASE certifications, her Porsche factory training certificates, proof that she was qualified to work on his car. Elena had calmly provided everything. ASE Master Technician. Certification. Porsche Bronze Level certification, from when she'd briefly worked at the dealership before opening her own shop. Letters of recommendation from customers, including a Miami Heat player and a prominent surgeon. Preston had barely glanced at them, dismissed them as probably fakes, and continued filming and mocking. His friends encouraged him, one of them saying, "Dude, just take your car to the real Porsche shop. This place is sketch." Preston was about to agree, about to leave, when Elena spoke for the first time since they'd arrived. "Mr. Whitmore, did you want me to diagnose your car, or did you come here to make videos?" Her voice was calm, not aggressive, just matter-of-fact, the tone of someone who'd dealt with entitled customers before and refused to be rattled by them. Preston turned his camera toward Elena. "Oh, she speaks. Yeah, I want you to diagnose it. But honestly, looking at this junkyard, I'm not confident you can find anything the real Porsche techs missed. They're factory trained. You're, what, a neighborhood mechanic who learned from YouTube?" Elena didn't take the bait. "I learned from my father, who was a master technician for 40 years, and I've diagnosed and fixed 17 GT3s in the last 2 years, including 2 that Porsche dealerships told customers needed new engines. but if you'd rather leave, that's fine. I don't chase customers." Preston smirked. 17 GT3s? In this shop? I'll believe it when I see it. Fine. You've got one. Hour to figure out what's wrong. If you can't, I'm leaving and writing reviews everywhere, warning people about this place. Elena nodded. 1 hour. But I work alone. You and your friends can wait in the lobby or outside. I don't work with audiences. Preston started to protest, but one of his friends pulled him toward the waiting area, a small room with plastic chairs, a coffee maker, and Spanish-language magazines. Preston kept filming through the window that looked into the shop, narrating quietly to his phone about how this was going to be a disaster. "Before we go further, I want to ask, where are you watching from? United States? Another country? Drop a comment and let me know. And tell me, have you ever been judged by someone based on where you work or what you look like, only to prove them completely wrong? Let's build a community that values skill over appearances." Elena walked to the GT3, popped the hood, and began her examination. The Porsche 911 GT3 is a masterpiece of engineering, a naturally aspirated 4.0-litre flat-six that revs to 9,000 RPM, producing 502 horsepower through mechanical precision rather than turbochargers. It's an engine that demands respect, proper maintenance, and deep understanding. The problem Preston described was an intermittent misfire at high RPM. Above 7,000, the engine would hesitate, lose power momentarily, then recover. The dealership had replaced spark plugs, ignition coils, updated the engine software, checked fuel injectors, and tested the throttle body. Nothing fixed it. The misfire persisted, happening randomly enough that it was difficult to diagnose on a dyno or with diagnostic equipment connected. Elena started where every proper diagnosis starts, gathering information. She opened Preston's service records on her tablet. He'd provided them when scheduling the appointment, though probably didn't expect her to actually read them thoroughly. 4 dealership visits. Spark plugs replaced twice. Why twice, if the first set was new? Coils replaced once. Software update performed. Fuel injector flow tested on a bench, all within spec. Throttle body cleaned. Compression test performed. All 6 cylinders showing 185-190 psi, perfect. So mechanically, the engine was sound. Electrically, everything tested good. Software was current, but the symptom persisted. Elena knew something the dealership techs apparently didn't consider. Intermittent problems are almost never in the components everyone tests. They're in connections, grounds, wiring, or conditions that only manifest under specific circumstances. She started the GT3, let it idle. Perfect. Smooth, confident. That characteristic Porsche flat-six sound. She revved it gently to 4,000 RPM. Flawless. She let it warm to operating temperature, then held it at 6,000 RPM for 10 seconds. Still perfect. She turned it off, grabbed a flashlight and inspection mirror, and started examining wiring harnesses, not just looking, but touching, moving, flexing every connector and wire. She worked methodically, starting at the engine computer and following harnesses through the engine bay. Preston and his friends watched through the window, Preston still filming, narrating, "She's been staring at wires for 20 minutes. This is such a waste of time. Porsche already checked all that." At minute 23, Eleanor found something. A wiring harness running along the passenger side of the engine, feeding signals to cylinders 4, 5, and 6, had a connector that looked perfect. Clean, properly seated, no visible damage. But when Elena flexed the harness by bending it slightly, she felt something wrong. The connector had resistance when it should have moved smoothly. She unplugged it, examined the pins inside with a magnifying glass and bright LED light. 3 of the 8 pins showed slight discoloration, not corrosion exactly, but heat damage, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. This connector had been getting hot, which meant high resistance, which meant intermittent signal loss to half the cylinders under load conditions. But why would this connector have heat damage when everything tested good? Elena looked at the wiring diagram on her tablet. This connector carried high-frequency signals from the engine computer to the ignition coils for cylinders 4 to 6. If there was high resistance in the pins, the signal would degrade at high RPM when the computer was firing signals rapidly. At low RPM, the slower signal frequency wouldn't be affected enough to cause problems. This explained why the misfire only happened above 7,000 RPM. That's when signal frequency peaked and resistance in the damaged pins became critical. But what caused the pin damage? Elena inspected the connector housing more carefully with her magnifying glass. There, barely visible, was a hairline crack in the connector body. This crack allowed moisture intrusion, which caused corrosion on the pins, which created resistance, which generated heat, which damaged the pins further. A self-reinforcing failure cycle that only manifested under specific high RPM conditions. The dealership techs had probably tested this connector with a multimeter at static conditions and found good resistance. They'd checked continuity and found proper signal, but they hadn't tested it under load at high frequency, and they hadn't inspected closely enough to see the hairline crack. Classic case of testing what you expect rather than investigating what you observe. Eleanor walked to her parts inventory, shelves lined with carefully organized components for common repairs, and pulled a new, genuine Porsche connector assembly. Part cost, $47. She cut the old connector out of the harness, carefully stripped wires, soldered in the new connector using professional-grade electronic solder and heat-shrink tubing, then wrapped the repair in factory-spec loom tape. The repair took 18 minutes. Total elapsed time, 41 minutes. Eleanor started the GT3. Again let it warm, then held it at 8,000 RPM for 30 seconds. Perfect. Smooth power delivery, no hesitation, no misfire. She turned it off, walked to the waiting area where Preston and his friends sat. Fixed. Connector failure in the ignition control harness for cylinders 4-6. Hairline crack allowed moisture intrusion, created high resistance, caused intermittent signal loss at high RPM. Replaced the connector. Total time, 41 minutes. Cost, $47 for parts, plus 1 hour diagnostic at my standard rate of $150. Total bill, $197. Preston stared at her. You're joking. You fixed in 40 minutes what Porsche couldn't fix in 4 visits? Eleanor shrugged. Porsche tested components individually. They didn't look at the wiring harness critically enough. It's a common mistake. Dealerships replace parts until symptoms disappear. I find root causes. Preston stood up, still holding his phone but no longer filming. I want to see. Show me what you did. Elena led Preston and his friends to the GT3. She opened the hood, pointed to the repaired connector, explained the failure mode in detail. Preston listened, his earlier arrogance draining away as he realized this woman he'd been mocking on camera for 30 minutes had just solved a problem that had cost him $8,000 at the dealership and provided an actual solution rather than expensive guesswork. One of Preston's friends, a guy named Marcus, who'd been quieter than the others, spoke up. Eleanor, I've got a Ferrari 488 with an electrical gremlin that's been driving me crazy for 6 months. 3 different shops can't figure it out. Can you look at it? Eleanor nodded. Bring it by. I'll take a look. Preston cleared his throat, looking genuinely uncomfortable. Eleanor, I need to apologize. What I said about your shop, filming you, making fun of your equipment, that was wrong. You just fixed my car in less than an hour for $200 when Porsche charged me $8,000 and failed. I was an asshole. I'm sorry. Eleanor looked at him calmly. Apology accepted. And for the record, my shop looks like this because I invest money in tools, training and diagnostic equipment instead of interior design. I don't need my ceiling to look pretty. I need my scope to be properly calibrated. That's how I actually fix cars. Preston pulled out his phone, not to mock this time but to post a correction. He found his earlier video from 30 minutes ago, where he'd been calling the shop a junkyard and questioning Elena's skills. He'd posted it to his Instagram story, where his 120,000 followers had already seen it. He deleted the story, then filmed a new one, standing in front of the GT3. 30 minutes ago, I posted a video mocking this shop and this mechanic. I was completely wrong. Elena Rodriguez just fixed my Porsche GT3 in 40 minutes after Porsche's dealership failed for 4 visits. She diagnosed a problem nobody else found, explained it clearly, fixed it properly, charged me a fair price. I judged her based on appearances instead of listening or waiting to see her work. That was arrogant and unfair. If you have a car problem in Miami that nobody else can solve, Come to Rodriguez Auto Repair in Little Havana. She's the real deal. I'm sorry, Elena. He posted it. Within an hour, it had 15,000 views. Within 12 hours, 180,000 views. Within 2 days, it had been picked up by local Miami news outlets as a story about humility, skill, and challenging stereotypes. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. Elena's phone started ringing constantly. People wanted appointments. Other exotic car owners who'd been struggling with dealerships wanted second opinions. Journalists wanted interviews. Car forums shared the story. Preston's apology video became a teaching case in business schools about customer service, assumptions, and authentic expertise versus surface appearances. Eleanor hired 2 additional technicians within a month to handle the increased workload. She expanded from 2 bays to 4, leasing the adjacent vacant storefront. She bought new diagnostic equipment, a $40,000 oscilloscope, a $25,000 alignment rack, updated scan tools. But she didn't change the fundamental nature of the shop. The floors were still concrete. The walls still needed paint. The coffee in the waiting area was still cheap Cuban coffee in a battered pot. Because Eleanor understood what Preston had learned the hard way. Quality isn't about appearance. It's about capability, integrity, and results. Preston became a regular customer, bringing his GT3 for all service, bringing his other cars, a Range Rover, a Mercedes G-Wagon, a Lamborghini Huracan he bought 6 months later. He referred dozens of friends. Marcus brought his Ferrari 488, which Eleanor diagnosed and fixed in 2 hours. Faulty body control module creating phantom electrical issues, $280 repair that other shops had quoted $3,500 to fix by replacing everything connected to the module. Marcus referred more people. The cycle continued. Within a year, Rodriguez Auto Repair had become Miami's worst-kept secret, the modest shop in Little Havana where real problems got solved by someone who understood that flashy doesn't mean skilled and expensive, doesn't mean effective. Elena never changed her prices. Diagnostic rates stayed at $150 per hour. She never raised rates based on the car's value, unlike dealerships and high-end shops that charged more for exotic brands. A Ferrari got the same hourly rate as a Honda. Preston noticed this and asked her about it one day, while waiting for an oil change on his GT3. Elena, you could charge $300 an hour and people would pay it. Why don't you? Elena was under the GT3, draining oil, but her voice carried clearly from beneath the car. Because my value isn't determined by what people will pay out of desperation. My value is determined by my skill and integrity. I charge what's fair for the work I do. If someone can't afford me, I'll help them find another good shop or teach them to do simple repairs themselves. My father taught me that mechanics should help people, not exploit them. Preston thought about that while drinking terrible Cuban coffee from a styrofoam cup in the waiting area that still had plastic chairs and Spanish magazines. He realized Elena had something most successful people he knew had lost, principles that weren't negotiable regardless of financial opportunity. It was humbling and inspiring. The story eventually reached Porsche Corporate. Through their customer feedback channels, multiple GT3 owners had reported that an independent shop in Miami was solving problems Porsche dealerships couldn't diagnose. Porsche sent a regional training manager to visit Elena, expecting to find someone cutting corners or using unauthorized procedures. Instead, they found a master technician using proper diagnostic methodology, genuine parts, and factory-spec repair procedures while outperforming their own dealership network. Porsche offered Elena a position as a regional training consultant, traveling to dealerships to teach diagnostic techniques. She declined. She didn't want to travel. She didn't want to leave Little Havana. She wanted to keep fixing cars in her father's shop, serving her community, proving every day that excellence doesn't require fancy surroundings. Porsche respected that, and instead sent their own techs to shadow Eleanor for training. She welcomed them, taught them freely, never worried about competition because she understood that raising the overall skill level of mechanics benefited everyone. Customers got better service, techs learned more, the industry improved. Several journalists wrote feature stories about Elena, most focused on the wrong things: female mechanic in male-dominated field, immigrant daughter succeeding against odds, small shop competing with dealerships. Those angles were true but missed the point. The real story was simpler. Skill, integrity, and hard work create value that no amount of marketing or appearance can fake. Elena proved it every day, and the people who mattered, the customers whose cars she fixed, the community she served, the technicians she mentored, understood that, without needing it explained. Preston Whitmore III kept the video of his apology posted on his Instagram permanently. He occasionally shared it again with new commentary about the lessons he'd learned from that experience. The lesson that stuck most: never judge capability by appearance, never assume. Expensive means better, and when you're wrong, apologize publicly as loudly as you were wrong. His followers, many of them wealthy, entitled, used to getting their way, saw a different side of success through Elena's story. Some of them changed how they treated service workers, mechanics, people they'd previously dismissed. Not all of them, but some, and that was enough. Elena continued running Rodriguez Auto Repair the way her father had taught her, with skill, integrity, and respect for every customer regardless of what they drove or who they were. The shop still looked modest. The floor still needed better cleaning than Elena had time for. The coffee still tasted like it was brewed in 1995. But when you needed a real mechanic, someone who'd diagnose properly instead of guessing expensively, someone who'd charge fairly instead of exploiting desperation, someone who'd treat you with respect whether you drove a GT3 or a 20-year-old Civic, you went to Little Havana. You found the shop between the Cuban bakery and the laundromat. You walked past the cracked concrete and mismatched toolboxes, and you met Elena Rodriguez, who'd fix your car properly because that's what her father taught her to do, and that's who she was. And no amount of money or fame or opportunity could change those fundamental truths. So one final time, where are you watching from? And what's your story of being underestimated, of proving doubters wrong not by talking, but by delivering results they couldn't deny? Drop it in the comments, because Elena Rodriguez proved that excellence speaks louder than appearances, that integrity matters more than profit, and that the best revenge against mockery is capability that can't be argued with. Let's build a community that values substance over style, together.